liftoff and the clock has started. Yes, sir. Reading you loud and clear.
Roger roll, Discovery.
Discovery, roger, go from them.
Good evening and welcome to the October 23rd, 2019 edition of Space News. This is Michael Abdullah and I have Tina Stagg here with me again tonight, and we're both from the Space Association of Australia. So let's get started with some Australian space news. Black Sky Aerospace will become the first Australian rocket manufacturer to gain priority access to the Arnhem Space Centre in the Northern Territory. The Equatorial Launch Australia Space Centre, located near Nhulunbuy in the Northern Territory, is the same site that will see NASA undertaking its first launch from a non-government-owned facility. The announcement also marks a first for Australia's space sector and is an indication of the ongoing developments in the local commercial space industry. Equatorial Launch Australia CEO Carly Scott said increasing access to local launch vehicle manufacturers is an exciting option for the site, and we are pleased to provide a launch platform that, we hope, will significantly enhance the growth of opportunities for Black Sky Aerospace as a vehicle of choice here and abroad. BSA Director Blake Nikolic said, launching from the ELA site in the near term will provide our customers with the benefits of being close to the equator. In the longer term, it allows us to continue developing nation-leading rocket technologies that can carry payloads to orbit and beyond using local expertise and our proven ability to create reliable launch vehicles. The two companies signed a letter of intent that ensures site planning and development in the Northern Territory considers Black Sky Aerospace's current and future needs. And moving to our friends at Rocket Lab in New Zealand. Rocket Lab successfully launched a small sat for Astro Digital last week. An Electron lifted off from Rocket Lab's launch site on New Zealand's Mahia Peninsula and placed the Palisade satellite into orbit 71 minutes later. The 16U CubeSat is intended to test technologies for Astro Digital's Corvus small-sat platform. The satellite's orbit, more than 1,000 kilometres high, is more than twice as high as previous Electron launches. The company said the launch tested upgrades to the Curie kick stage, including a switch to a bipropellant engine for higher performance. And over to you, Tina.
Thanks, Michael, and good evening, space fans. Turning to US space policy, the chair of the House Appropriations Subcommittee that funds NASA said last week he was not yet ready to support moving up a human lunar landing to 2024. New York Democrat Representative Jose Serrano said at a hearing he couldn't support a $1.6 billion down payment on Artemis in the financial year 2020 without knowing the total cost of the program, which NASA has yet to disclose. Unless we know how much this is going to cost at the end, it would be irresponsible for us to take the first step, he said, a sentiment echoed by other Democratic members of the subcommittee. Republican members endorsed Artemis but pressed NASA to make greater use of the Space Launch System and rely less on commercial vehicles. And in International Space Station news, 2 NASA astronauts made history at the weekend as they completed the first spacewalk by an all-woman team. Christina Koch and Jessica Meyer replaced a battery charge and discharge unit that failed to turn back on after a spacewalk to replace batteries in the station's power system. The EVA was guided by veteran NASA astronaut and Capcom Stephanie Wilson on the ground and fellow astronauts Luca Parmitano and Andrew Morgan on the International Space Station. It was Koch's 4th spacewalk and Meyer's first. Both Koch and Meyer joined NASA's astronaut corps in 2013. The event was marred by a live-crossed US President Donald Trump, who mistakenly referred to the EVA as the first ever female spacewalk. When Mayer explained there have been many other female spacewalkers before us, the President used his middle finger to massage his forehead, a gesture taken by some commentators as flipping the bird. NASA is considering the purchase of at least one more Soyuz seat from Russia as insurance against continued commercial crew delays. Administrator Jim Bridenstine and Acting Associate Administrator for Human Exploration and Operations Ken Bowersox said recently discussions were underway about ensuring a US presence to the ISS after next September, when NASA's access to Soyuz seats under existing agreements runs out. Boeing and SpaceX say they expect to launch crewed test flights of their commercial crew vehicles to the ISS in the first quarter of 2020, but those programs have experienced significant delays and run the risk of more. Any agreement to buy additional seats may require Congress to extend an existing waiver of sanctions against Russia that runs out at the end of 2020. NASA has hired Doug Lavero to be its next Associate Administrator for Human Exploration and Operations. Lavero is a newcomer to civil space but has extensive experience in national security space, including spending 4 years as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defence for Space Policy. NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine said his extensive space experience and success in program management made him the best choice for the job. The position, which oversees International Space Station operations as well as development of commercial crew and exploration systems, was previously held for many years by Bill Gerstenmaier until his reassignment in July. Turning to NASA's Commercial Crew Program, NASA and Boeing have agreed to the following target flight dates for the Starliner CST-100 spacecraft. A pad abort test on November 4 at the White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico, and an uncrewed orbital flight test on December 17 from Space Launch Complex 41 on Cape Canaveral Air Force Station in Florida. Meanwhile, the SpaceX Dragon 2 in-flight abort test is scheduled for late November or early December. To NASA's SLS and Orion program, a NASA official says the first launch of the Space Launch System could slip to as late as the middle of 2021. In a conference presentation, Ken Bowersox, Acting Associate Administrator for Human Exploration and Operations, said while the current but very aggressive schedule for SLS calls for its launch date in late 2020, it's more likely that we will move out into 2021, possibly as late as the middle of 2021. Meanwhile, work has resumed on the core stage of the first SLS rocket after an unspecified corrective action. An agency spokesperson said NASA made a forward-looking corrective action request to address production issues for future SLS rockets, a move that led Boeing to stop work on some parts of the current core stage for an intensive site process review. The exact issue that prompted the request was not disclosed, but may be linked to issues installing the rocket's 4 engines in the horizontal position rather than the vertical as originally planned. NASA has revealed the new spacesuits it is developing for the Artemis program. At an event at NASA headquarters, the agency put the Exploration Extravehicular Mobility Unit, or XEMU, and Orion Crew Survival System through its paces. The XEMU is designed for moonwalks, with upgrades compared to Apollo-era suits to make them more flexible and resistant to the lunar environment. The Orion Crew Survival System is a pressure suit for astronauts to wear on the Orion spacecraft, incorporating improvements from similar shuttle-era suits. and to NASA's Planetary and Space Science program. An instrument on NASA's Mars InSight lander has made new progress burrowing into the Martian surface. NASA said last week that the probe, or MOLE, for the Heat Flow and Physical Properties Package instrument managed to dig about 2 centimetres deeper into the surface in the past several days. The MOLE, designed to go as deep as 5 metres below the surface to measure the planet's internal heat flow, had been stuck about 30 centimetres deep since March because of a lack of friction with the surrounding soil. And over to Michael.
Thank you, Tina, and let's look at some European news. The European Space Agency will seek nearly $14 billion over the next 3 years from its member states, starting next month. ESA Director General Jan Werner told a news conference last week that the proposed budget would be taken up by the ESA Ministerial Council at its meeting in late November in Spain. The budget will include funding for additional Orion service modules and a role in the Lunar Gateway, and potential funding support for the Ariane 6 and Vega C rockets. And moving to Russia. Russia hopes to launch a long-delayed ISS module next year. Russian industry sources said the Nauka multi-purpose laboratory module would be shipped to the Baikonur Cosmodrome in mid-January, with a launch expected in the northern summer. The module has suffered extensive technical delays in its development, including the discovery of metal shavings in its fuel system. The module will provide laboratory space on the station's Russian segment, as well as life support equipment and a docking port for Progress and Soyuz spacecraft. And to Chinese news. China is making preparations for the return to flight of its Long March 5 rocket around the end of this year. 2 cargo transport ships left port on the Yangtze River recently for the northern city of Tianjin. They are expected to collect components of a third Long March 5 heavy-lift launch vehicle, which has been grounded since a 2017 launch failure. Bringing the Long March 5 back into service is critical for many Chinese missions, including the Chang'e 5 Lunar Sample Return mission, a Mars orbiter and lander, and a space station. Turning to India. India hopes a new pass by the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, or LRO, will reveal the landing site of its Vikram lander. LRO imaged the expected landing site of the spacecraft last week, but no photos have yet been released. LRO passed over the site last month, but did not see anything, perhaps due to poor lighting conditions that are better on this pass. Vikram, part of the Chandrayaan-2 mission, lost contact with controllers during its descent to the lunar surface more than a month ago. And on to Japan. The Japanese government has signalled its intent to participate in NASA's Artemis program. The Committee on National Space Policy said last week it would formally notify the United States later this year of its decision, including offering technical cooperation. The committee deferred a decision on providing modules for the Lunar Gateway. And back to you, Tina.
Thank you, Michael. Turning to commercial space programs, SpaceX is seeking permission to launch as many as 30,000 additional Starlink satellites. The FCC, on SpaceX's behalf, submitted 20 filings to the International Telecommunications Union, or ITU, for 1,500 satellites apiece in various low Earth orbits. SpaceX's ITU filings contain details about frequency usage, proposed orbital altitudes and the number of satellites it wants, but not when it seeks to launch the satellites. ITU filings are an early step in deploying a satellite system, and are often made years before a company plans to build and launch spacecraft. In a statement, SpaceX said it was taking steps to responsibly scale Starlink's total network capacity and data density to meet projected demand. SpaceX President Gwynne Shotwell said the company was in discussions with the US Army about using both Starlink and Starship, the latter perhaps for point-to-point transport on the Earth rather than for satellite launches. Turning to Virgin Galactic, and the company has unveiled the attire its customers will wear on Spaceship Two suborbital space flights starting next year. The flight suits, developed by Under Armour, will be personally tailored for each customer and include a variety of unique design elements. They are designed to help customers feel more comfortable during the high G phases of launch and re-entry and include pads on the elbows and knees. And back to Mike.
And that's all we have time for tonight. Thank you, Tina, and we'll speak to you again next week. Good night.